So how do you know when you're done with a quilt? How do you know when it's finished? That's the question I think a lot about with most of my quilts, but especially this one, and you'll see why in just a minute. First, I want to tell you the story about young Miss Augusta #2. She is the second in a family. I made young Miss Augusta #1 for a friend of mine when she had her first kid a few years ago. And a client saw that one and really loved it and asked if I would make another one in that family. And it's not identical. You know, I'll probably post the first one with it so you can see it side by side. But they're definitely connected somehow in ways other than just color palette. One of the ways they're connected is that when I made #1, I made a small paper model first. Now, I don't normally do that. Usually, I'm just kind of seeing what happens on the board in front of me. But I did make a small postcard then, so I decided to follow the same process for this one. And so I made this. Here's the original. You can see that. And you can also see how it translated from the paper when you scaled up to the wall. Certain details had to be added because what might be a nice balanced composition on a small scale might need a few shapes like these. I call them the spurs. I added the spurs just to fill in that negative space and give them some interest. This is a cool approach though, because it allows you to work out a lot of the compositional issues, details, whatever, before you start cutting fabric. So that could be a cool thing to play around with if you've never done that before. When I was working with this composition, let me get out the way so you can see it. When I was working with this composition, one thing I was aiming for was to find some kind of a balance, but not a symmetrical balance. I was looking for some kind of equilibrium inside of asymmetry. And you see that in a few different places. You see the arms at the bottom and the top up there. They have different crooks to them, right? The spurs are in different places on either side. They're not mirror image. There is a very sweet little gap. It's about 1/4 inch. I don't know if you can see that in the video. There's a sweet little gap up there. Whereas at the top equivalent corner, you can see it joins, it comes together. And so there's a few ways in here in which some balance was found inside the asymmetry, which sounds like a good motto for living, if you ask me. So let's take a look at some of the closer details of this quilt, right? Because we started this talk with how do you know when a quilt is done? And I thought this quilt was done until I woke up the next morning and I looked at it and I said, oh, that thing's off balance, that thing's off balance, that thing's off balance. And so I got my red thread fabric out and appliqued some pieces down on top, and I'll show you where those are. I want to show you this because I think it's important that we remember with improv quilting that the improv doesn't stop just when you get the size you're going for, right? Sometimes you need to take a look at the finished composition and add something or take something away, right, to give you some balance. And sometimes the easiest way to add is just to hand sew something down. So take a look here. Really, unless you're a trained sewer, you're not going to recognize that was hand sewn and added down later, right? Same thing, this little square right here. I wanted to add that to kind of mirror the crook that you see in the arm similar at the top. And you don't know that's hand sewn. And if you are a experienced hand sewer and you see that, then it adds some value. It shows you some process. It shows you the artist's hand that this quilt has experienced. Another time in which I use hand sewing, because the rest of this is machine pieced. Another time I use hand sewing was when I got here in this funky corner, and I think these are called Y seams. I'm not quite sure, but where you have to sew a block into a corner, right? And you have to sew on two sides at the same time. And so the easiest way for me to do that is to machine stitch one side and then finesse it with hand sewing on this side. And again, you can look pretty close. And you don't see those stitches, not really. So, improv never stops improvising. I hope you have liked this little chat, this talk. I hope it gave you some good ideas for your own practice. Remember to try out maybe making a paper model first, see how that works for you. And let me know what you think in the comments. All right?